So welcome everybody. I hope you can
Recording
hear me.
is on.
Oh, thanks. Welcome everybody. As the announcement for this is said, my name's Uri. I'm not a huge expert on Bubble. I guess think of this as a second-year student trying to teach first-year students the basics of something. That's probably about my level, and that's who the intended audience is. So this is for people who have no Bubble experience or maybe just the barest minimum. And the goal is to introduce the basics, to go over a bunch of features, and by the end of this, hopefully to give you enough comfort and knowledge with Bubble that you can start diving in and doing stuff on your own. So I was going to start with the architecture of Bubble, so just on the conceptual level. The way I think of it, there's basically two types of objects in Bubble, and one main type of process, and then a secondary type of process. And the two objects are the design elements, things that go on the page, and the database, which should be straightforward. It's a database like any other thing. What's kind of unique about Bubble is the way that everything is tied to design elements on the page. So unlike in a lot of coding languages where things are kind of coded in the abstract and then put on the page or related to the page, there isn't really much of an abstract in Bubble. The things on the page are the objects of Bubble, and they relate to each other and to themselves and to the user and to the database. And the main process that Bubble uses to make things happen is workflows, which follow conditional if-then logic and can be used to operate on the design elements on the web page or on the database based on user activity or conditions or things like that. So when I say two objects in the process, the two objects are the design elements, and the database and the processes are the workflows that sort of relate the two. And then there's kind of a secondary set of processes that have mostly to do with style type things and transitions that apply pretty much just to the design elements. And those can be kind of worked into the design elements themselves. And I'll show you a little bit of what I'm talking about. I'm going to try to share my screen here. And I'm going to dive right in to a pre-prepared but blank Bubble editor called Launch 2021. If you're getting into Bubble, you go into apps, and I like to start with a blank canvas, but you can I like to start with a blank page like this and ignore all the recommended features that Bubble recommends to you. So on the outline, I talked about design elements first, but I think I'm actually going to start with a database because it's a little bit simpler, and because then the design elements can be responsive to the database. Feel free to jump in and ask me questions anytime if you're out there. So database is hopefully straightforward. You get your different types of things, and then you have fields that are like properties of those things. So for example, I want to do something really simple to start with. User is a built-in type of thing, and it's always in a database by default, and it has some features that you can see here that are always there. So every user has an email, and every item in the database has a created date and a modified date if applicable, and I think everything has a slug. So these things are built in. So I want to have a database with two types, user and pets. And by the end of all this, we'll build some tools to let you add a pet to the database and to view all of a user's pets. So when you define a type, you can then define, speak of the devil, my cat Billy is climbing on the table and interfering with what I'm doing as I speak. You can define a type. So we define the type pets, and then you create fields to create attributes and to relate the type to other types of things. So you usually, for any type of field, you probably want a name, and then the type, the field type will be text. So the name is rendered in text. You might want age, and that's going to be a number. And then you might want a field. So cats and dogs are very common pets. So you might want a field that is a yes, no type of field, which is yes if it's a dog and no if it isn't. Same for cats. Make it a yes, no. And we want to know who the owner is. And the type of owner is going to be user, because it's going to be the pet users who are using this app. And I had this pre-planned, and I don't know what it is. So I hope I got all the fields. So we've defined a type pets, and now we want to be able to display all of a user's pets, and a user can have multiple pets. So we're going to create a new field type called pet, and the field type is also going to be called pets. Actually, should change that to singular probably. And then it's going to be a list because a user can have more than one pet. So we're going to create that. And that is about as complicated as it gets, although I wanted to change pets to singular pet just for niceness. So once you've defined the data types and how they all relate to each other, you can go to app data and you can create entries here. So do we have any users? We don't. I'm going to create a user for myself. So we're going to call it Uri. And I'm not going to add any pets yet. I'll use my email. There it is. So I've created one user, and now I'm going to go over here to all pets, and I'm going to create entries for my two cats. They're both 11. They're both cats. They're both not dogs. And one of them is named Billy. And the owner is going to be me. It's not. Oh, I think I'll create it and then I'll fix the things that I think I did wrong. So when you're relating different types to each other, you want things to be configured correctly so that, for example, you see a person's name. The person's name displays when you call on a person and not the person's email. So for user, probably email is the default. It is the default way to identify somebody, but I need it to be. I need it to be the name. Now, how did I do that? Name is user. Name is text. I'm going to create name again. Type text. And somehow I need to make name the field that identifies the individual. I forget how to do that. Oh, primary fields. Okay, so we want both pets to be identified by name and users to be identified by name. And that is so, I'll show you, I'm going to go and edit Billy. When you go to owner, the owner is a user, but the user is an abstract object, so you identify it by the name. And that did not work for some reason. And I don't see myself as a user. Maybe because I recreated user. So I'm going to create a new entry, make it me, and my email. I'm going to add Billy, who is now an object. So that added fine. And now I'm going to go back to Billy. So one thing about Bubble is it's complex and things often go wrong. And there is a significant learning curve, as you can see here. I don't know why my name doesn't show up. Right. Oh, the email is not original, so I need a new unique email. That's the problem. So now URI is created, and that's successful. And now I can go to Billy and add me as the owner. There we go. Now we're going to create another entry for another cat that I have, whose name is Celia. And I'm going to add myself as the owner. And then finally, I'm going to go to all users. And now I don't understand why URI does not. Did I miss something? I'm just refreshing to see why it did not work. But yeah, I think the lesson is when you are dealing with fields. Let's see. So there's actually two entries. When you're dealing with fields, you have to worry about things like uniqueness and primary fields, which are the fields that function as identifiers. So I was going back into, and now I have two of these. So I'm going to eliminate one and hope that it still works. And then I'm going to edit this one, and I'm going to add Billy and Celia. And now I think our database is structured as we wanted it to be. So that's types and fields. I wanted to share one other thing in the database, which is option sets. And option sets are when you don't necessarily want to have a type of thing in your database that you manipulate a lot. You just want like standard reference points. So one way to use this is if you have something that's just going to be fixed and global, like the days of the week or the states in the US or the countries of the world, where you might have a drop down and you want all of the options, you can create an option set. So let's say for days of the week, create, and then you could just type in your options, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. I'm not going to do all of them. And then you can pretty much, if you want to do a drop down or in certain other circumstances, you just go to option sets, pick days of the week, and you'll have those options. Another way to use them is if you have a data type and you have a field that you just want to limit the options. It's like you want to create a category. So for example, for pet, let's say you don't want cat and dog, but you have a list of 10 pets, and you want every pet in the database to be one of those 10. So it's categorical. You don't want to use text, because then if it's text, anyone could enter any type of animal. If you want just dog, cat, ferret, goldfish, whatever, you define that as an option set, and then you would be able to use that categorization feature in the field of a data type. So that's what I'll say for the database right now. So now I want to go to design, which is the main visual thing. I have a note to talk about the design elements concepts before diving into the different types. So there's the concept of style, dynamism, conditions, and transitions. We'll talk about those 4 things, and I'll illustrate them with text. So we haven't talked about this sidebar here where the options are displayed, but when I talked about the 2 basic types of objects in Bubble and the main type of process, it's these top 3 things here. So design is where you take elements and put them on the page. Data is the database that we were just in, and workflow is the if-then conditional operations. And that's mostly what I'll be talking about. But then number 4 down here is styles, and styles are just a feature of the design. So we're here in the design tab. I'm going to select text. You just click on it, and then you drag and create a box. And every time you put a design element on a page, this thing pops up, which lets you do a lot of things with the design and basically tells you what to do with the text. So the broad concepts are style. So let's just pick some text. Let's say hello. And if you go to here, text or any other type of design element will have predefined styles that you could see if you go to the styles tab over here. So this defaulted to body copy, which is the type of font and the whole style that you see here. You can edit any of the styles, and that takes you into the style tab. So you can see body copy, it's a style. It's a style of text. You could see that if you go to text on the side here. Body copy, these are all the features of it: size, font, styling, word spacing, and so on and so forth. You could edit this and you could create new ones. So you can create, I won't demonstrate it, but you can just click on add style and then define your own style and then use it whenever you design something in text, or if you want it for another type of design element, you do it that way. So that's style. I wanted to then talk about dynamism. So there's a lot of ways you display things that you have produced and that the user has created, as opposed to things that you, as the person building this, is predefined. Like hello is probably predefined, but if you want to, in this box here where you're saying basically what goes in the design element, you can insert dynamic content. So for example, you could do hello, and then we happen to have only one user in the database. So we use this drop down. Well, you could do current user, but actually there is no user logged in because we haven't even defined a login. So I want to do a search for users and enter the first one. So do a search for is a really important choice, because anytime you want to query the database, that is, anytime you want to access the database and put stuff from the database on your page, you'll usually do it with do a search for. So if I click do a search for and I go to type user, that basically pulls in the entire list of users. And then what I would do, I wouldn't actually need to sort right now because there's only one user in the database. So let's just leave that alone. And you don't have to sort. So I hit close. You'll notice that if it's just users, you get this in red, which indicates there's an error. And that's because there's a type mismatch, because you need something in the text type because it's going to be displayed as text. And user is not a text type, it's a database object. So if you click on more, you get to, first you have to get a single user. So right now there's a list of users. If you go to first item, then you'll get the first user that's pulled up. And then if you go to '*s name, that pulls the name element, which is which has in the text format. So now you're going to get it in blue to indicate that it works properly. So in fact, and this is how you actually check your work in Bubble, you go to preview up here in the top right corner. It should say hello Uri once it runs. And that's because Uri is the first user in the database that gets pulled up. And this text Uri is the name feature of that. Where am I? Okay. So that's dynamism, and you can use it to put all kinds of things in text boxes and other design elements. There's conditionals and transitions have to do mostly with styling. So conditions let you define conditions under which styles change. So for example, when this text is hovered, we can make it invisible when hovered. Oh no, we can't. There's not make invisible. You can set something to invisible by default, but not make it invisible. So let's just say font size is going to change. So instead of font size 14, we'll make it font size 36. So just to show that, we use a condition when the text is hovered, increase the font size. I'm going to hover over the text and the font size increases. So you could do a lot of things that way, you know, when something is clicked, when something is pressed, when something is clickable, when something's viewable, and so on and so forth. So that's the conditional. And then the transitions has to do with like fade in, fade out type of stuff. So the font size, duration 1000, and ease is you know, the fact that it's fading in. I don't even use this, so I'm not even sure if this will work, but we'll try. There, the large size font faded in when it's hovered, and fades out kind of slowly when it's not hovered. So those are the features, of which I think dynamism is the most important, the ability to use dynamic content. So the things I want to show you, you've seen text now. Buttons are very important. So there's a button, and I hate this style, so I'm going to change it to outline button, which I like a lot better. Sliders, I happen to like sliders, so I'll show you one. Sliders are a type of input. So these are organized. You kind of have the visual things on top. You have containers, and then you have different types of input form where the user could put input in. So a slider is just a thing that looks like this, and you can slide it up and down to change the numerical input. So what I haven't showed you yet is all these boxes, and I only use a subset of them, but you can do things relating mostly to style and appearance for any design element that you use. So for the slider, you could define the minimum value and the maximum value. For text, you could do a lot of things. You double click to pull up this box. You could say, for example, so some of this is responsiveness. So shrink the element height if the text gets shorter. Cut off content if the element is not tall enough. The element is visible on page load. So if you want the user to generate some content and you don't want things to appear on the page right at the beginning, you uncheck this, and then you need to use a conditional to make something visible under whatever circumstances are required. And actually, let's not get into that now because we're already half an hour in. So you see text, and I want to shrink this. Button, slider. So we'll talk a little bit about containers. So containers are, you know, things that are not in themselves visible design elements, but are used to structure the other elements. So groups are used a lot, and I'm gonna create the group over here. and they're just used to group different types of content, but they have a lot of their own features and content. So you can define a type of content for a group. It has its own style. You can decide whether it's visible or invisible on page load. And the way to get things in groups is just to drag them, click them and drag them in. So now all three of these design elements are in the same group. You could define common styles and things for them. We could just use it to move things around together. Groups are very useful for responsiveness. So for defining what happens when you you view the web page on different screens, for example, putting it in a group will mean that things get affected together. But we're not even going to get into responsiveness today. That's more advanced. Repeating groups are what you use to display lists. So I want to show you, for example, you have to define a type of content for a repeating group. So we're going to say pets. So we have a list of pets. We defined two different ones. And the data source is going to be, remember, we're querying the database. So it's going to be do a search for type pet. And we've now defined, so each square in this repeating group is going to be associated with a different pet. Now, actually, because there's two pets, only the top two of them are actually going to be identified with them. But that's something that could be changed and manipulated. And the way you would use this to create a list is inside the repeating group, you just need to dictate the content of the top one, and then the content of the rest will follow. So we have pets. We want to show the pet's name. So you want to insert dynamic content here. Current cell, meaning that for each cell, you want the pet associated with it, and then the pet's name. And that should display as text. So if we preview, you should see Billy in the top cell and then Celia in the second cell, corresponding to the names of the two different cats in the database. So that's a very useful way to show lists. I wanted to show pop-ups. And pop-ups are, where are they? They're containers. So when you define a pop-up, you kind of see, it kind of gives you its own separate kind of page. You can define a type of content, but you don't have to. And then because it's a container, that means you can put stuff on this page. So if we want to put, eventually we'll want a form for creating a new pet. So what we could do is put a text element on, put a text element on here that says create pet. Pick some kind of heading style to make it big. And then we can have some input forms. Input is next on the list. So the input one here on top is basically just regular text input. So we can say type the name, let's just simplify it. Let's just say pet's name. And then we'll want other information like pet's age. And let's use a slider for that. And of course, we don't get to put text on the slider. So let's say a pet could be between 0 and 20. So this is how you determine the parameters of the slider. We want some text to alert the user that we're looking for age. And we actually, as you'll see, when you use a slider, I'll show you on the preview. When you use a slider, oh wait, I can't use the preview yet, and I'll tell you why in a second. When you use a slider, it doesn't actually show you the number. It's not a feature of the slider in Bubble. So the way to show the number is to use dynamic text. So you create a text box, say here, you insert dynamic content, and then you go down here to slider input B. This one is slider input B. And slider input B's value is just the input. So as you drag this, the age changes, slider input B's value change, and then this text will display the number. The reason I can't show you anything in the preview is because we created this pop-up, but we haven't done anything to make it visible. So I'll show you later when we do workflows how to do that. So for pet, we want age, name. We want to know if it's a dog, cat, or other. So let's just use radio buttons. So we could define 3 choices: dog, cat, other, and the radio button makes sure that you can only select one of them. And we want to know who the owner is. So that could be another. Actually, for the owner, we would use a search box because we want the owner to be someone who's already a user. You can't just enter some random person's name as the owner. And the search box basically searches the database and only allows you to use an option that is defined by the database. So I'll show you what I mean. Not user, we want owner. Choices style is dynamic choices, and we want to define the list of options as a user. So now, and the field to search will be the user's name, because user, of course, cannot appear in text because user is not a text element, but user's name is. So now when you type the owner's name in this input box, it's going to have to match the name of somebody in the database. So I think that's all the information that we need. And then we'll just put a button in here, which is a visual element, a submit button. And I do hate this style, so we're going to use an outline. So that's the pop-up. So I mentioned the reason we can't get to the pop-up yet in the actual app when we do a preview. That's because we need something to make the pop-up actually pop up. So let's change this button here to say new pet. And then when we do the workflows, I'll show you how to get to make this dynamic so that when you press new pet, what happens is the pop-up will pop up. Okay, 2 more design elements, which will be pages and reusable elements. Pages is simple, they're up here, and as long as you remember that, you'll never fail to navigate or create a page. So some of these are predefined, like 404 error and reset password. But if you want another page, you just add a new page, and you could call it whatever, pets page. And you don't have to clone it, but you could if you want. And now a new page is created. And finally, reusable elements. I'll just talk about them quickly. The things like footer and header and sign up are predefined elements, because the idea is that the header and footer are things that are on every page. So you don't want to create a brand new one every time. They're predefined as usable elements. And then when you create a new page, in fact, as we just did, I created a pets page. If we want a header, we just do that and the header will pop up. And that's the predefined header, not anything that I designed. So we don't actually need that. And then you can define your own reusable elements. Like if you want 10 different variants of the same pop-up, you make that pop-up a reusable element, and then you're just able to use it over and over. Okay, so that is the design elements. I should stop because I'm just talking and I feel like I'm talking fast. Does anyone have any questions? Oh, you're on mute, Kai.
Hey, what's up? I definitely do have some questions. Thank you for letting me know that I was on mute.
I hope you haven't been asking questions all along, because I'm not looking at your face. I'm looking at the screen.
Nah, just taking it in, brother. Just taking it in.
Great.
I guess I want to backtrack a little bit, right? So I know the first place we started was, so I have a slight understanding of Python, right?
Mhm.
And to me, that means that I know we work with variables, um, inputs, and strings, right? So it's kind of like I see, if I look at that and apply that knowledge to this, I see that you have a database. Pets would be like one variables. Then pet names would be like an element that we're connecting through the, I guess, system that we just designed to search pets and owners, right? So now you'll have one database for the pets, one database for the owners. You'll be able to enter information about pets and search information about owners. That's cool. Um, but I guess the question was, I know you started initially and it was options, and I just wanted to know what key pieces there were to get started. So maybe if we could go back and do like the fundamental pieces, just like the most essential pieces. Because I know a lot of this is
Yeah.
about working with tools.
Yeah. So let me know if my answer is meeting your question. But when I started off, I was talking about, I think there's two fundamental types of objects in Bubble.
Okay.
The design elements and the database objects. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, the database objects is straightforward, right? It's probably the same. It's just a variant of what it would be like when you're working with the database, like any SQL database or anything like that. And then the design elements, like you mentioned variables,
Mm-hmm.
and that doesn't really, it doesn't really exist in the abstract in Bubble, right? You can't just define X. You can't just declare X and say X equals 3, right?
Yeah.
Um, Everything you do has to tie back in one way or another to the design elements. Now, there is a way actually to, you know, if you wanted to build a calculator or anything else involving just a declared variable, you can make the variable a property of a text box or a button or whatever. I could show you how to do that now if that makes sense.
So I just want to review real quick. You said there are two real, was the word you used tools or options?
Objects.
Objects. Love it. Love
Yeah.
it.
So that's how I think of Bubble is you have two objects and two types of object and one type of operation. And so everything you're doing is either in the database with the design elements on the page or with the workflows that relates everything with conditional logic.
So I'm going to repeat one phrase to you real quick. In Bubble, there are two types of objects and one type of operation. And the last line you said after that one type of operation, what's can you go into that a little bit more?
Yeah, so workflows, which is the next thing in the presentation, is the operation that connects design elements to database elements.
So the objects are the database and design elements, and the operation is workflow.
Yeah.
Okay. And so then I guess the goal basically is to connect the information in our database with and structure it using the design elements, and the process of doing that is creating a solid workflow, and that's our no code style of coding.
Yeah, well, I would say you're using the workflow to manipulate the design objects using information in the database, if that makes sense. It might make more sense if I show you rather than try to describe it.
Okay, it works. That works for me. Using workflow to manipulate.
So I think it's intuitive once you see it in action. All right, so with workflow, you get there. There's two ways to get there.
Could you ask that question? Could you say that last line one more time? This is just from my head. Using workflow to manipulate.
Oh yeah, yeah. So I think the workflow is used to manipulate the design elements using information in the database.
Word. Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you. Let's do it.
Okay, so I was saying there's two ways to access the workflow. One is just to go to this tab over here. The other one is if you are in the box that you use for the different design elements, like if you go to this button box, you can click Start Edit Workflow, and that's going to start with the assumption that the button is being clicked. So the workflow all works on if then, it actually uses the word when. So it's when then logic. So up here, the boxes up on top here, each one of these represents an event that triggers the workflow. And then below the line here is where you have the actions that result when the triggering event happens. So for example, when the button new pet is clicked, you click here to add an action. And I think what we wanted to do was to make the pop-up that we designed pop up. So you do that by going down here to element actions. You go to show. And then you pick the element that is hidden that is going to show when the button is clicked. And in this case, it's the pop-up. So I just want to preview that so we can test it and make sure it works. So I click the new pet button and the pop-up shows up. So that works. So back to the workflow. I want to focus on a few different types of triggering events that are common and a few types of the triggered action events that are common. Over here we have when page is loaded. So a lot of times you want things to happen when the page gets loaded.
Animations, those kinds of things.
Yeah, or even like if you want, we mentioned variables, and I haven't told you how we do them in Bubble, but let's say you want you're building a calculator that divides one number by another number. When the page loads is when you want to define the fields that will store those numbers. If we have time, I'll show you what I mean later.
Okay.
But it's very useful to have the when the page loads definition. So then there's the element is clicked, which is kind of obvious. The user clicks a button and something pops up or changes or displays or whatever. And then there's when input changes. So sometimes you don't want to wait for the user to press a submit button. You actually want the, let's say the text that they're entering in an input text field to track. You could do that under elements when an input's value is changed. And I'll just breeze past that. So the question is then, what are the common ways, the common things that are used to make actions happen? Let's go back to here for an example. If you look at these, if you look at this list and these elements, there's about 4 of them that I use way more often than the other ones. So one of them is account, and this is basic account stuff like login, password, send a confirmation email, things like that. There's navigation, which is basically, move to another page or refresh the page or open up a website. There's data, which is when you're actually doing stuff with the database, creating a new thing in the database, making changes to it, deleting it, copying it, and so on. And then the 4th common one is element actions. So whenever you are showing something, hiding something, resetting the inputs in an input field and stuff like that, you'd use element actions. These other ones are sometimes useful, but I'm not going to go into them now. So that is roughly the information part of the intro. So then I wanted to show you some examples of how I would build certain things. So let's talk about building the new pets form. So we actually designed this. We know that when you click new pet here, the pop-up will pop up. And actually the pop-up is invisible. So I'm going to show you how to find invisible elements. You go up here to elements tree, and you go to the faded font that says pop-up A. We really should give this a name. So we'll call it pop-up create. So we're going to create a workflow to create a new pet in the database with all the fields that need to be defined. And why is this invisible? It should be visible on page load. I'm not sure why it's invisible. Oh well. So the pet's name gets put in here, and that is just going to get, we're going to do the workflow on the submit button to handle the pet's name. So what we're going to say is when the button submit is clicked, a pet's going to be created, and the pet's name is going to be whatever is in this input field. The pet's age is going to be in whatever is in this slider input field. And then we had yes or no fields for dogs and cats. So it's we're going to do that based on this radio input. And then we're going to define the owner based on what's put in this search box.
Okay.
And remember, I wanted to show you this dynamic input for the slider. So remember what I said, this slider itself will not show you the pet's age as you slide it up and down. So we had to define this text using this dynamic content of the slider's value. So I just want to test whether that works. So new pet, and you see the 0, and as you move the slider, the age changes. So we know that works, and we know the radio button works, and we can test this. So if we try to put Kai in here, I guess it doesn't show you that it's not good. But actually it does. So if you put someone who's in the user database, the name will pop up underneath like that. So this is how we know that this is a valid user. Whereas if we try something else, it doesn't show up. Okay, so we've designed the form okay, and now we're going to build the workflow. We're going to build the workflow to make it create a new database. So we go to workflow, and we know we got the pop-up to pop up when the button new pet is clicked. Show pop-up create pet. We don't need to create any other action. I still don't know why the text at the top is invisible, but I'm not going to worry about that now. So the next thing we want to do is when the submit button is clicked, so we go to elements, and element is clicked, and then the element, we choose the element to be the submit button. That's when we want to create a new thing in the database. So we go to the actions, we go to data things, oops, create a new thing. And the type of thing is going to be a pet. And here's where you input the information. You set the fields of the type pet. So every pet has an age, and that's going to be determined by the slider's input. So it was slider input B's value, which is a number, is going to represent the age. It's going to be, I don't think we could define the cat dog thing quite this way, so we'll do that later. But the name of the pet is just going to be the input pet's name's value, which is a text, right? So we're always making sure that the type of the field that you're setting corresponds to the type of the input, which is why we've been adding the word value here for the appropriate inputs. And then the owner is going to be a type user, and it's going to be the search box owner's value. So that should be it. The reason I'm not doing the dog and cat is because in these field boxes you can't use conditional logic within them, so you have to use a workaround. So this should be sufficient to create the new pet. And now we want to add, so whenever you have a chain here, it's just a sequence of steps. So if the button submit is clicked, then it creates a new pet in step 1, and then we want it to determine if it's a dog or a cat in step 2. So here we're going to go to data again, but make changes to a thing. And the thing we're going to change is the pet that we just created in step 1. So you can actually choose result of step 1 as your option, as kind of a shortcut. And now we want the field dog and the field cat depending on what the radio button shows. And you do that with this only when down here. This is when you do the conditional. So we're going to do one step for a cat. So cat equals yes, only when radio button value is, do we have cat? I think we have to do it like this, is cat. Except I should not have put the quotation marks because they're automatically added. Right, so what this means is when the radio button's when the radio button's value is cat, meaning when the cat radio is filled, then we're going to set the field cat on the pet we just created to yes. And because it's only when, it's not going to happen under any other conditions. So that was step 2. Now for step 3, we're going to go to data, make changes to a thing, and we're going to do the same thing for dog. So we're going to change the result of step 2. We're going to change the field dog, and we're going to say that the value is yes, only when the radio button's value is dog. And there's one more thing that we need to change, which is the user. So we added the owner to the cat, to the pet, but we didn't add the pet to the user. So we're going to make change to a thing, and the thing is going to be actually it's going to be, it's the cat's user, the pet's user. So we're going to go to result of step 3, and then we're going to click on more, and then we're going to go to '(s) owner, and that is how we identify the owner. So we're going to change the field. We're going to change the pet field of the owner by adding this pet. So we go to pet, add, because remember that pet is a list, so you can add the pet we just created to the list. And we're going to add the result of step 3, and that should be it. I hope I didn't forget anything, but we can test it, and then we can go check our database to make sure it worked correctly. So we go to new pet, and we're going to call the pet Ruby, and we're going to say she is 5, and that she is a dog, and that the owner is Uri, and click submit. Now we didn't do anything to show us that it actually submitted. So from a user experience perspective, you probably want an alert to pop up saying successful submission or something like that. But I know that I hit submit, so now we're going to go back to the database and check if the dog Ruby was added to all pets. And it was. So Ruby was added, age 5. It did not add it as a dog. I don't know why. We can get back to that. So this shows that Uri was added as the owner. And we'll see if Ruby was added. Actually, we should refresh the data because sometimes it doesn't happen. Okay, so Ruby was not added as a pet. So that means we messed something up in the workflow, which, like I said, happens a lot because Bubble has a lot of little details. So I want to go back to the work. I want to go back to the workflow. I want to go step by step. So this is the debugger, and it helps you kind of see at which point the process breaks down. So I'm going to hit submit again, and because I clicked on step by step over here, it's going to show me things step by step. So the button submit is clicked. We know that happened. Run next, create a new pet, type pet, and the values are age 5, name Ruby, owner, search box owner's value, which is evaluated over here as being Uri. Run next. So make changes to result of step 1. Changes cat. Yes. Only one radio button's value is cat. And here it says the value of the cat is no, so it did not make it a cat. We know that. Now, why did it not come out as a dog? We click here. And for some reason, it did not come out with the value as a dog. You know what? I don't want to waste a lot of time troubleshooting this. I showed you how to build it. I made a mistake somewhere along the way. It happens a lot.
Coding 101.
Sometimes you have to break your head to figure out exactly what you did wrong. But it's not that Bubble's not working. It is that I messed something up.
Very fair.
Sorry, do you have a question? Comment? I thought I heard you starting to say something.
Now, when you said that it's not that Bubble's not working, it's that you messed something up, I added to that and I said programming 101, right?
Yeah. All right. So, and as you see, the repeating group automatically added Ruby twice because I clicked the submit button twice. Once when I was testing, and then again when I was trying to see where I messed up and I was looking at things step by step. So we added another dog to the database. So we built a new pets form.
I was going to say, I'm actually not against going over it from the last step one quick time and just kind of touching over the essential pieces. I know it started with, like, if we could just go over some of the essentials, that might be helpful for myself, maybe some other people too.
Are you talking about going over the workflow that we did?
Yes.
Okay.
So I know we said we create a new pet, right? Then, so initially it starts when the page is loading and we have the new pet button designed onto the page using our design tools. Great.
Yeah.
So when the new pet button is clicked, could you go over there for 1 second?
Yeah. So when the new pet button is clicked, that's when the pop-up becomes visible. We did that by doing show.
And then using our design tools. Okay, no.
So you go to element actions, show, and then you pick the pop-up create pet, and that's how you get the pop-up to pop up.
And you'd have to make that pop-up available in your workflow by using your design tools.
Yeah.
So you would start in your design tools. Okay.
Yep.
Do you mind showing us other places, like, so would you mind showing us other places that, like, those things connect? I don't know the best way to say this. Let me pause, be intentional.
Like how the design connects with the workflow?
That's a good start, I think, because I can see. All right. And I'm just gonna watch.
Yeah, let me think. So how the design connects with the workflow? So let's say,
Because I see you have this one page where it says new pet. So if you were to open the app, right?
yeah.
Um, what would your landing page look like? How do I know where we start from there? Or like if we're starting from the ground up, right? Or
uh,
is this one of those like top down kind of processes?
I'm not trying to understand what you're asking. Are you asking about the defaulting to this particular page? Because that's determined by the fact that it's the index page. So I built all this stuff on the index page.
And that's where it defaults.
Yeah. So
Okay.
this would be the landing page. Like if it was a real app, I'd design the index page to be some landing page, and then I would use the navigate function. Actually, why don't I show you the navigate function in action? So
Okay.
I did build another page called the pets page. I haven't put anything on it yet, but